Well, welcome to AGG, the podcast, and I'm delighted to be talking to two very well-known figures in the scholarly landscape, both of whom have had an enormous influence on scholarly publishing, not least for their dynamism and the energy that they've brought to all their activities. The immediate impulse for this interview came from Lorraine announcing her retirement a few weeks ago. So we thought this was a good moment to look back on two fascinating careers. So let's start with a question for both of you. I believe you met when you both at JISC, perhaps?
Yes, we did. Yes, we did. I realized nodding is not helpful on a podcast. So
No.
that is where Alicia and I first met when we both worked for JISC. It seems a very long time ago, very different days, but that's where we started.
What were you doing? Alicia, what was your role?
Oh, well, actually, we handed over roles between us. So I started out leading consortial negotiations for the JISC on behalf of all the UK universities. And Lorraine took over that role, and I moved to leading research and development initiatives on how to use computing and creative ways to advance teaching and research. And Lorraine did a terrific job. She set up JISC Collections.
Ah, okay. And how long were you both at JISC?
Slightly later than you. I think I was there about 16 years altogether, and I left in 2015.
Gosh, fascinating. And so how did you, Alicia, this one's for you. How did you get into JISC in the first place? How did you get into scholarly publishing, in fact?
It was kind of a weird stroke of luck, which felt like not luck at the time. So I'd done a PhD in archaeology. I was looking for my first teaching job in an archaeology department. And I got my first job actually doing digital archiving for archaeology data sets in a service that was funded by the JISC, the Archaeology Data Service, it was called. And from there, I was actually recruited and given the opportunity to do consortial licensing. Not that I had any experience of working with libraries or consortia or publishers for that matter, but at that time just wanted an academic who was passionate about electronic access to information to be trained by librarians to negotiate with publishers, but somebody who had a firsthand appreciation and enthusiasm for access, digital access. And I was just lucky. I was hit with a lucky stick. I left archaeology. I had great misgivings about this. They gave me 6 weeks to make up my mind to take the job. I was in such angst about it. So glad I said yes. And I popped up in the JISC and discovered this whole world of information science that I didn't even know existed. It's been amazing. Just such a privilege to learn about so many different subject areas.
Fascinating. And Lorraine, and how did you get into scholarly publishing?
Well, I worked in publishing for quite a long time, and I worked the sort of last job I had. I worked for a children's publisher actually that was doing really innovative things with it wasn't online then, but it was electronic publishing. Really
Gosh.
fantastic things. And for example, we had this most amazing newsletter that went out to hundreds of people on a floppy disk. Would you believe? Yeah, it was just doing really crazy, amazing things at that time, using computers that had less power than my phone does. I don't know how we even managed it, to be frank. Um, but I was feeling disillusioned with publishing, and I was looking for a change of direction. And I've been looking at various jobs, and it was just more and more of the same. And then one day I saw this advertisement um, for the job that was to take over from Alicia, actually. And I wasn't 100% sure even quite what it was, but I thought this sounds really interesting. And again, this idea about empowering people through access, through online access, sounded so exciting. And anyway, I went along for the interview, And I must say, sometimes now when there are many acronyms in the JISC, and I realised in my interview I got some of them rather muddled. So, but nonetheless, amazingly, they gave me that job, and yeah, and it was the most wonderful opportunity, and yeah, I'm very grateful. I'm very good too.
And it was brilliant. Lorraine into JISC with this publishing experience, the real world experience, and it added just another layer. Michael, this is a theme I'm sure we'll come back to again and again in the conversation. We both moved between libraries and publishing, and that bridging between the communities. It's a fascinating space to work in, and it's really important to have real practical experience of all perspectives in this space.
One thing that's fascinating is you, neither of you have mentioned anything about negotiations, and as far as I understand, you were both very much involved in negotiating, and so where did that skill come from?
Well, I think in my previous roles in publishing, I had been involved in negotiating with publishers. I'd negotiated with authors and various other contractors. So I had quite a lot of practical experience. Um, but I think really, I think also, doing my degree in psychology didn't help me with psychology at all. But it really made me bring an evidence approach to negotiating. And I can remember, very often people would think when we were talking to them about our role and just that, negotiating with the publishers was all about thumping your fist on the table and so on. Whereas that doesn't really help very much, despite the popular idea that's what a negotiator does. So I've always tried to bring, that very evidence-based approach to negotiation. And I think as well, what Alicia said is so right. And I think something that we bring to our work is this understanding of libraries and of publishers. And I think, when you're negotiating as a consortium leader with publishers, you have to understand the publisher. You have to understand their objectives. You have to understand their fears and what they see as the risks, and then build up your evidence-based negotiation. So yeah, they're my top tips for negotiating, really.
I can see the relevance of psychology for negotiation. It's not quite so easy, Alicia, to see the link between archaeology. Do you think it stood you in good stead for your work at JISC?
It did absolutely in two ways. My PhD research was on the Roman invasion of Scotland and the resistance of the local population to this incursion. And sometimes the dynamic between librarians and publishers can feel a little similar to that. So that's kind of the lighthearted way to think about it. But more accurately, in the United States, where I was trained, the archaeology is a subdiscipline of anthropology, and the anthropology skills about learning about different cultures and doing that by embedding yourself within them. It's that skill set that has been really actually very helpful. That's where the negotiation ability was nurtured from, and I'm fascinated with people, with their differences, and listening to them and really understanding them from their own perspective. And I think that's exactly what anthropologists do.
Fascinating, and I quite understand the sort of cutting across disciplines, being aware of the different roles of publisher and information scientist, librarian, and so on. I can see that. So, Alicia, after your role of negotiating, you say you went on to a different role at JISC. What were you doing there?
I was leading the innovation program. So we had a budget of about £150 million a year to invest in research and development projects that were then conducted in all of the universities across the UK. So we would advertise the availability of funding around different topic areas, and the team would manage the selection and the review process for the bids that would come in. and then did program management. So they were projects on stimulating digital library development, but also innovative teaching and learning initiatives. The first MOOCs and online learning resources came out of some of those funding initiatives, and also some terribly complicated projects like how to improve management information available to university leaders and administrators. There were projects on helping to think about how to index the web back in the days when people thought that that would be organized within the academic sector rather than by organizations like Google and so forth. And I just learned so much. It was great. We did projects on digital preservation, which is a continuing theme of interest, and also projects on, oh gosh, everything, middleware, authentication and authorization, all of these sort of topics that are still relevant and in many cases quite problematic 25 years later.
It sounds like a very wide-ranging role, with covering lots and lots of different areas, and also very high profile. I think you had to be quite robust because in a situation like that you attract a lot of attention, and you're very much in the public gaze. I think the same was true for you, Lorraine, because when you took on JISC Collections, that was another high profile role.
It was indeed, yes.
Do I understand that you actually created that?
Yeah, Lorraine came to it with like experience and poise and psychology. I think sometimes I came to it as a very young person with too much confidence, and I just kind of like proceeded as if I knew what I was doing and learned the hard way sometimes. So I apologize to any early colleagues that I might have brushed up the wrong way inadvertently while learning.
Yes, but Alicia, we talked about this earlier today in a different context. And, when you have lots of confidence, you might not have a lot of experience or skill, but that confidence is what we need to drive things forward, because people who don't have, or maybe I should say, people who have more confidence and ability will tackle things and make change that perhaps older, more wiser, or more poised people might be too scared to do. So it's a good thing.
That may be true. Do you think it was also something to do with that particular period at the beginning of the 21st century, when a lot of computing was still, the internet was still in its infancy, a lot of things were very open, there's an opportunity to sort of do things without lots of experience because there wasn't any experience around?
Absolutely right. There was such an innovative kind of atmosphere, and the UK was particularly well placed because of the ELIB initiative. Leaders like Lynn Brindley and Mary Auckland and Derek Law had convinced the government to invest money in figuring out what an electronic library needed to be in the future. There was a lot of resourcing around. They consciously wanted to let 1,000 flowers bloom. They wanted to try all sorts of initiatives. And it was a time when you could be really creative and experimental. You could fail and learn from that and move on. And we were all figuring it out together. It was a real privilege to be working in this space at that time.
It absolutely was. It was so exciting. And, I think the things I'm proudest of in my career we did at that time, and there wasn't really a rule book. And I remember what one of the people in my team, he's quite senior in JISC now, said to me, "You seem to be making this up as you go along." And I said, "Yeah, well, I am really." But there wasn't a rule book. It was all new, and we were really able to be creative, as Alicia said, and try new things and do new things.
Do I understand, Lorraine, that you created the role at JISC Collections, that you're the first to have that role?
Well, it sort of developed and morphed over time. So, as Alicia said, she was in that role before me, and then I took over within the JISC. But then JISC Collections, as it became the UK Library Consortium, if you like, was spun out separately, and I became CEO of that organization. So it sort of changed its structure, and then it went back into the JISC eventually. So it changed. But yeah, so I was the first leader of JISC Collections in that form that it became there. Yeah.
So there you were as a manager with all the sort of all of the problems that brings. Did you enjoy it?
Oh, yes, I so did enjoy it, and I think we just achieved with a really small team. We just achieved so much. Um, Alicia had started work when she was there on the JISC model license. Now, this sounds quite a boring thing. And then, I took that forward with the team that we were then. And, that has been such a game changer, not just for libraries in the UK, but across the world. And the work that we did in developing that to really provide libraries with rights and protections, but also it actually helped publishers too, and that standardization. And the JISC model license has been adapted and adopted by consortia worldwide, by publishers worldwide. And that's just one example of the really, I mean, I know it doesn't sound that exciting licensing, but really you've got to have those tools in place and you've got to have that standardization. And that was sort of amazing work we did, and with a very small team. Yeah.
It was also the roots of that project on the standard licensing, which became the JISC model license. The seeds were in a regular meeting that I had while at the JISC with Sally Morris from ALPSP and Graham Taylor from the Publishers Association. And we were actively looking for projects that would benefit both the library and the publishing community and could be informed by both of them, and that would advance everyone. And at that time, publishers were struggling with different contracts coming from customers. Customers didn't know what contracts that they wanted or needed. And so working together to come up with a model that could be shared, that was informed from the perspective of both communities, was really, I think, helpful. And Lorraine's explained that beautifully already.
Yeah, I think another thing that we did was slightly differently, was I really thought was around democratizing access and really making things available to academics, to students in every university in the UK that was never possible before. And for example, Alicia negotiated an agreement for early English books for all UK academic libraries, and then I negotiated an agreement for the 18th century collection. And suddenly, every library in the UK will make accessible to their users these digital versions of these very, very old books. And many of those books in their physical form, you could only get to if you were a really senior academic at a research intensive university wearing your white gloves and so on. And suddenly, for the first time, students could interact with this primary resource material. So, that's just another example of some of the really exciting things we do.
I remember when I first found out about the what later became the JISC historic books, the sort of just the sheer enormity of that project. I mean, to capture everything published before 1700, then 1800, quite an astonishing achievement. What made you think it was even possible, Alicia, when you started?
Oh, that was a chap named Mark Sandler in
Wow.
Michigan, who kind of animated the library consortium there and was very entrepreneurial. He did a lot of collaborative work with organizations like the Chadwick Keeley publishing team with ProQuest. And he went around the world drumming into us that it was possible if we all pooled our resources, and if consortia would commit to supporting it financially, then the publishers could afford then to digitize and bring this collection to life. And it was this international collaboration that was crossing organizational and community boundaries that made it possible. And I don't think nobody really thought it was going to work, really, to start with, but we kept doggedly going for it, and it did in the end, thank goodness.
Yeah, I always remember actually we did a conference which the British Library actually hosted for us around those collections, Michael, called Waking Up in the British Library, and we had some various speakers who had used those collections, and there was one academic, and I can't quite remember the focus of his thesis. I think it was something to do with, I don't know, anyway, so something ancient, and he had spent years and years in the British Library, and he'd found 4 instances in these ancient books to support his thesis, and that was that. And then when these collections became available, he said, in a few minutes, I found another 7, which actually sort of disproved my thesis. But it shows you how powerful it is.
Absolutely, a remarkable collection. And I think I don't know if you're familiar with you know the story of Google attempting to capture sort of the world's libraries, and how that project failed. I mean, don't you agree that project and its very checkered history reveals, I think, how successful you've been in negotiating a very challenging environment to try and pull lots and lots of resources together.
But that Google book scanning project has perhaps not fulfilled all of its original objectives, but it has been transformational in that the Hathi Trust would not exist had that project never happened. And so a lot of these really ambitious digitization and digital access initiatives, they have to kind of adapt and change as they hit copyright complications, or differences in stakeholder needs and interests that have to be navigated. But they can have profound effects, even if they're not exactly as they were originally envisaged. And having room to be flexible and to let a project land in a slightly different place than you originally anticipated is really important if you want to keep progressing and moving forward.
I think you're absolutely right, and this brings me to your next role, Alicia, when you worked for Elsevier, where negotiation and a public face was very much part of that role. So tell us about your role at Elsevier.
Michael, can I tell you about a role before Elsevier? Because I think
Sure.
it makes
Yep.
sense. So between JISC and Elsevier, I worked at the Publishers Licensing Society, or it's called
Yep.
the Publishers Licensing Service now. And it's a copyright collecting society. And the reason I went there, I was lucky to be offered the role of chief executive, but it's because at the JISC, I kept hitting up against copyright as a barrier for libraries and as an absolutely fundamental enabler for publishers. And I didn't understand copyright, yet it was clearly fundamental to expanding access to information. And so moving to the PLS gave me the chance to learn about copyright organically and how it can be used to enable authors, visual creators, publishers, other rights holders as well. So I did a nice stint there for 6 years, and then moved to Elsevier, and that was lovely, actually. It was a newly created role to lead on open access. It was a return to academia, out of the copyright world, but armed with an absolute fundamental commitment to the fact that any challenge or problem can be solved if you could get stakeholders, authors, libraries, researchers, publishers, funders together to think through issues and concerns and to identify practical challenges. And working for the world's largest academic publisher in the early days of open access was such a privilege. Again, it was like doing anthropology every single day.
It sounds fascinating, and I think there is a common theme through all this, that sort of achieving consensus is what you've both been involved with. JISC Collections all about sort of getting agreements, and as you say, your role at Elsevier. So let's talk a little bit about open access. It was when you started at Elsevier, it was very much the sort of the big topic, and it's still a topic today. But I think open access has changed somewhat. Do you think open access has achieved its goals yet?
Achieved its goals. There are so many goals behind open access, and this is one of the things that makes it a little bit challenging to realize. In fact, I was pretty convinced that OA would be completely settled and a done deal by 2015, and I was kind of proven wrong about that. It's more complicated and it's taking more time, and so part of that are the different drivers. It's to democratize access to knowledge, to ensure that everyone anywhere in the world can access what they need and want to explore. It's about democratizing writing and authorship and scholarship as well, to make sure everybody is enabled to communicate in an open way. It's about advancing and accelerating the dissemination of knowledge. It's about interoperability, so that there's frictionless flow of and access to information as it makes its way around the web through different products and services and workflows and tools. And all of those drivers need to be funded. They need to be sustainable for the stakeholders who rely on them. So there are business and governance and legal issues, as well as the complicated details about the technology and interoperability and standards. And it's just a really difficult mix of different challenges, slowed up perhaps by occasional or too often slowed up by mistrust or misunderstanding between the parties who need to be involved to make it happen in reality at scale.
I think you're right. There's many different aspects of open access, and open access for discovery, I think, is on the way to being achieved. But there are other aspects of open access which I'm not sure if we've reached a sustainable model yet for open access. What's your view, Lorraine?
Well, I very much, as Alicia said, and I remember actually when I was at JISC, and some board member of JISC said to me, "Oh, aren't you a bit worried about your job? You won't be needed soon because we'll have open access." So anyway, my job was quite safe. But I think, so I know, but I think, so much has been achieved. And I think if we look at the world, what do we want? We want everybody to be able to read the science wherever they are in the world. Just like those books I was talking about, there shouldn't be those barriers about where you are, what type of institution, or even if you're in an institution. That should be available to everybody who can build on it. We also have the problem that the ability to publish has to be equal across the world. And that's one of the real challenges, I think, that we really are now facing, that whole issue of equity, and how some of the models that we have operating for open access, exclude people in the world who cannot pay APCs, for example. So, there is still a lot of work to be done. But again, I really agree. We have to be having those discussions. No problem cannot be overcome, but we need to be collaborative, and we need to really, have those discussions and talk to all the stakeholders in all places in the world to try and achieve that.
I love that. No problem cannot be overcome. It's wonderful optimism. There's a certain parallelism about both of you, because you both then moved on to roles in not-for-profit organisations. Alicia working with CLOCKSS, and Lorraine working with Counter. So Alicia, tell us how you got involved with CLOCKSS.
Oh, CLOCKSS was brilliant. It is an organization that I was involved with when I was at Elsevier. I was one of the board members representing the publishing community. I took over that role when Karen Hunter retired, and what an incredible role model she was. Somebody I learned a lot from. So I had a deep appreciation for the long-term role of digital preservation. And when Craig Van Dyke was retiring from the role of executive director, and it was advertised during lockdown in 2020, I just jumped at that opportunity. It felt like coming full circle, going back to digital preservation, which was my first job when I was at that data archive for archaeologists very long ago, working in an organization that worked harmoniously and well with libraries and publishers, and in a space that required their collaboration in order to make digital preservation possible. Again, I just feel lucky. I feel really blessed to be able to work with CLOCKSS. It's a wonderful, wonderful organization, and everything that becomes available through the CLOCKSS archive is open access. So it fits with my values, my principles as well. It's a brilliant organization.
And Lorraine, your role at Counter, you couldn't imagine anything more central, right between the libraries and publishers. That's the whole basis of Counter.
Absolutely, it was right in the centre, and again, that was another really wonderful opportunity. And one of the things I did at JISC that I was really proud of, we got some funding to develop a service called the Journals Usage Statistics Portal, known as JISC, a service that could aggregate all the usage statistics from different publishers, different platforms, so that a library didn't have to gather them all in, and that they could very easily access all their usage statistics. And then, of course, just built some tools on top, which took a lot of drudgery out of it. Again, it's a bit like a license. It sounds really boring, but we need to be able to evaluate, libraries need to be able to evaluate the use of the content they're paying for. And now with open access, that there's a broader stakeholder group who are also interested. Publishers want to see where in the world that open access content is being used. Authors want to know. So usage statistics are really important, but they only work if there are standards. You cannot automate anything unless you are running standards. And an opportunity came up to it was a sort of part-time role, but to lead Counter. And again, I absolutely adored it. It was a great opportunity. And, not many people realize this. I mean, Counter it was just me, really, part-time. But these wonderful committees of dedicated publishers and librarians really working on developing the standards. And of course, there were often real tensions, between what librarians wanted and what publishers could reasonably do with the technology and afford to do. So there were lots of tensions in developing those standards. And I'm really proud of what we achieved at Counter when I was there, and also really amazed to see it go from strength to strength. Tasha Melling-Cohen's now has that role, and she is really doing a fantastic job, and really making sure that Counter is relevant not just for subscription content but for open access content. So yeah, really wonderful role, and yeah, patience needed, but as I say, no problem cannot be solved.
I was astonished when I had no idea before I found out a bit more about Counter that it was essentially just one full-time staff person and all the rest were volunteers, which is quite incredible. It's a tribute to the
one part-time person and the rest are volunteers. But yeah, and that was often a bit of a problem because I'd open up my inbox in the morning and I'd have loads and loads of questions from publishers, from librarians, and it was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and somebody would say, well, you know, your help desk hasn't answered the question I sent at 9 o'clock this morning. And I thought, give me a break. You know, I haven't even had a cup of coffee yet. So, yeah, so of course, you know, but that in a way was a measure of success that people didn't realize it was such a tiny organization doing that. But, you know, but that is also a tribute to all those people who give their time to.
But alongside both of these activities, CLOCKSS and Counter, you're both involved in the wonderfully named Information Power consultancy. So when did that start?
It started a long time ago, and
Oh, yeah.
Lorraine, correct me if I've got this wrong, but Helen Henderson set up the organization, which used to, I believe, be called Ringgold back in the late 1990s. And what we now know of as the Ringgold database and service, which is offered by CCC, was spun out. She actually sold it, and in the process changed the name of the organization in around 2006, I think, from Ringgold to Information Power, and shifted the focus really to consultancy. Lorraine, is that right? Have I got our history
Yeah, yeah.
correct?
I think that's more or less right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Helen Henderson is amazing. She's like this dynamic, entrepreneurial person. She was always fun to work with and collaborate with. And, you know, it's a real honor to be entrusted with that legacy and to get to work with Lorraine on this it's splendid. It's an absolute treat. It's so much
And
fun.
we were very lucky because Helen worked with Hazel Woodward, providing consultancy through um, Information Power, but they both decided they wanted to retire, and serendipitously, I can't quite pronounce that word, asked Alicia and I if we would like to take it over. So it was a really happy thing to happen, and I'm so glad we did, Alicia, because we've been involved in so many exciting projects, and yeah, we've done such great things since we did that.
And it's a wonderful, consulting projects are just a wonderful way to keep up to date with changing developments in our field, to keep up to date with, you know, international networks that we've built
Yeah.
up over decades, and to get, you know, give a little bit back to the community where we can be useful.
For those who aren't familiar with Information Power, what kind of projects did you work on? What sort of areas were you involved in?
Oh, well, we are working we are working on lots of different projects. I mean, open access has been a really big theme, hasn't it, Alicia, of our work.
Oh, so over the last few years, we've done projects that have really looked at smaller independent publishers, for example, learned societies or um, uh, subject associations, this sort of publisher, helping them find sustainable paths forward and giving them practical tools that will facilitate them experimenting with and then transitioning to open access. That's been a real privilege, and that's made possible with you know, periodic funding from organizations like Coalition S, UKRI, ALPSP, the British Academy, JISC, and others. Again, the funders come from across that spectrum of organizations representing universities and the publishing industry. Um, uh, we've been looking at thorny issues like, for example, how do library consortia equitably apportion the costs of products that they collectively subscribe to across their members. That can be a very contentious and delicate issue. We've been looking at how publishers or service providers can develop more equitable pricing approaches that will enable organizations around the world to become involved, not as a result of waivers or discounts, but in a systemic and structural way, so that their ability to pay and their purchasing power is factored in advance without being an exception. What else? Oh, looking at
Well,
UKRI's open access book policy now. Sorry, go on,
yeah.
Lorraine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, before we did the project on the sort of equitable pricing, where we also were asked to facilitate focus groups from with this is all online, obviously, with participants from around the world talking about this problem of equity, and that was such a privilege, you know, to listen to people from South America, from India, from Africa, talking about, you know, what they saw as the barriers to equity and open access. So that was a really, really brilliant project that we did.
And when you work on these projects, are you working individually or jointly?
We do work
Oh
together.
yeah.
We have a shared background and complementary skill sets, but we also have this sort of network of partners, people that we can tap into who have skill sets that we might not have. For example, Dave Jago, who was a former publisher with the Royal College of Psychiatrists, he often works with us. He's very quantitative. That's not a skill set I have, for example. Um, and we're just blessed. We put together a team in response to a particular project that
And they say that
emerges.
organizations frequently sort of successful organizations have complementary skills, so you get sort of different skills sort of that help each other. So would you say when you work together, which would you say is sort of the skills that each of you brings to the party?
Oh, well, I can answer that. I think Alicia is definitely the clever one. She's the really, really brilliant one. Um, and she's got a fantastic strategic mind. So that's what she brings to it.
What Lorraine brings, she,
Mm.
she's got this incredible creativity. Like whenever I get stuck, I overthink things. You could just bounce ideas off of Lorraine. And she's like, well, you could do it this way or that way, or have you thought about this? And she can unstick anything. She's also so personable. People like her and trust her and talk to her. And she is wise. You know, she offers splendid life advice. I would encourage anyone with a thorny personal problem, pick up the phone and call Lorraine. You'll get some excellent perspective.
Oh,
Goodness, well, there's praise indeed.
I can
Um,
see a new
but
career
You're going to
in
call her,
agony.
Michael, aren't you? Right after this. Go for it.
Wonderful. Can we just touch on a couple of sort of present day things, the current affairs, I suppose. Lorraine, you recently stood as a candidate in the UK elections for the Green Party. So, do you think there's a way in which the scholarly community can get involved in things like climate change initiatives and things like that?
That absolutely is, and it was such a privilege standing as a candidate in the local elections, um, and um, but there are many ways that we can all contribute to this really terrible problem that our planet is facing, and I think scholarly publishers have a real role to play, and there's a project at the moment which is being run by one of the partners, one of the lead partner, I think, is Creative Commons. Eiffel is also involved in some other organizations, really looking to make sure that all the literature about climate change is open access. So for any scholarly publishers in those fields that are listening to this podcast, I'm sure there are many of you, please, I would say, have a look at that, because, you know, we were talking, weren't we, earlier on, about the great advantage of open access, that everyone in the world can read it and everyone in the world can build on each other's work. And we are facing so many threats to our future, to our security. So that information, that research shouldn't be behind barriers. We need to be able to share it. So yeah, absolutely. Look at that project and really work together to make sure that all the literature on this subject, and it is a wide subject, I understand, that it is open access, well, where it isn't already, of course.
And that's such an eloquent call to become active. I'm aware of and engaged with another project that is very practical in this area. It's called the DIMPACT project, and it's a collaborative project between environmental impact analysts, experts, and a variety of creative industry companies. So the big academic publishers are all participants, but so are film companies and music streaming companies and so forth. And they are working together to develop a standard, a practical standard for doing carbon footprint calculations. And CLOCKSS has become a partner in this project because all of these creative industry organizations preserve content, or should be preserving content, with trusted preservation services. So we've worked with them to develop what we hope will evolve and continue to develop in dialogue with other archives to become a standard for how digital preservation services can calculate each of our carbon footprints. It's a lot of heavy data lifting. It is more manageable if we're all working to a shared understanding of what needs to be calculated and how it needs to be exchanged. It's very like Counter, actually, but for carbon information. And armed with an understanding of what your current footprint is, then you're enabled to ask yourself really difficult and interesting and important strategic questions about what steps you can take to reduce your impact and your contribution to climate change.
It reminds me a little bit of the great achievement of publishing COVID papers and making those all open access during the pandemic, which I think was a great indication of scholarly publishing working together. So yes, so I do think great things are possible. Here's another really thorny question, something that I think an issue that none of us expected. What's your take on the recent legal action against the major academic publishers for non-payment of peer review, which I don't think any of us anticipated?
Well, I mean, I don't know a lot about this, to be sure, but I have had a bit of a look at it, and I actually think it is looking in the wrong place, because so often here in the UK, and I hear this from people in other countries as well, that academic tenure is so hard to get. There are 0-hour contracts and so little job security. And really, this is how academics need to be paid. They need to be paid through universities for doing academic work. And I think there is possibly a danger in having publishers pay for peer review, and it makes me think of restaurants that don't pay the staff properly because they get tips. So I think we have to pay academics appropriately and properly, and to try and ensure that they have much more security. So those are my thoughts on that one.
I'm not sure I can add to that. I'm just loving reflecting on that observation Lorraine has made. And it's a brilliant example of her creativity in practice, right? It's a different take than I had come up with. So I don't know the ins and outs of it either. I suppose I am concerned when important questions that are worth debating, and this does seem one that it is worth having an international conversation about, when it's done through a litigious process rather than in a more open and inclusive way. Maybe it had to be in this case. I don't know, but I think that can often be a barrier to increased understanding and resolving differences or navigating change. So that's just a personal preference, I suppose.
Yes, I agree. It's a rather confrontational non-confrontational approach. Finally, Lorraine, we started this conversation with the news that you were retiring, but I'm not quite sure. I'm still finding out things that you're still doing. So you're still involved in. I think you edit UK Insights, which is the journal of UKSG. I think you're continuing doing that.
Yeah, well, good opportunity for a quick plug here. I'm actually co-editor with Steve Sharp of Insights, which, if you haven't read it, it's a really great journal, fully open access, and certainly for the next few months, well, 6 months at least, I will be continuing to do that. I mean, clearly the editors do need to be involved in the world of scholarly communication, but to give them a bit of time and so on, I will carry on doing that for a while, yeah. And again, I've been doing it for many years, and I love the journal very much. So that's a pleasure to work on.
And are either of you planning to wind down the work on information power?
I'm not even sure I'm convinced that Lorraine will, because I'm taking an anthropological interest now in all the different ways people retire. And some people just disappear and they have a whole different life and they enjoy immersing themselves in it. And other people seem to keep coming back. They enjoy projects and the stimulation. And we'll see what Lorraine will do. She's got so many other interests. She not only is passionate about the environment, but she leads brilliant historical tours in Winchester. She's told me that she wants to be an eco warrior with her grandson. She's got all these different calls on her time. So we'll see with great interest what she chooses to put her efforts and energy into.
Oh, well, there's loads of things to do. But can I do one more plug while I'm on air and the podcast?
Please do.
One thing I am going to continue to do as well is help Think, Check, Submit. If you're not familiar with Think, Check, Submit, it's a great initiative that provides free tools for researchers around the world to help them decide what are the best venues for their publishing, to decide if a publisher or a journal is a trusted journal, and to avoid predatory journals. And again, it's a tiny little initiative, a great committee who put so much time and effort into it, and so important because one of the nasty things that has happened as a result of open access is we've seen the growth of these predatory publishers who not only damage the careers of researchers, but they ultimately could damage credibility, credibility of science, faith in science. So it's really, really important that researchers have the tools to be able to avoid these very unscrupulous people. So Think, Check, Submit, I will continue to help because it's such a fantastic initiative.
As you can call her for great personal advice as well on any subjects that you might in your private life. She's amazing.
I wouldn't be surprised if you'd come up with that slogan, Lorraine, that Think, Check, Submit. Anyway, on that note, that hopefully positive note, we'll have to end. But it's been great talking to you both, and fascinating to hear more about your joint take on the scholarly community and your contribution over the last 20-25 years. Thanks very much, and it was a pleasure to talk to you.